Chapter 1, Joseph wept. The pain of loss. The young man hit the bottom of the dirt pit with a thud. Was his lip bloody? Was his body bruised? I picture him grabbing his head, spitting dirt out of his mouth. Only 17 years old, he couldn't see over the sides of the deep pit into which he had been thrown. But he could hear the voices of his brothers as they ate their dinner by the fire, the very brothers who had just thrown him into the pit. Could he hear their plot to kill him? As he cradled his throbbing head, could he comprehend what was happening to him? Was he in shock? Did he call out to his brothers for help? Was he stunned at how they ignored his cries? I imagine the teenager hearing the sounds of men and animals moving closer. Hope of being rescued from the pit grew in his heart. Sure enough, his brothers dragged him out, but instead of apologizing for their brutality, they pushed him into the hostile hands of traitors who would only dehumanize him further, treating him as a thing to be used for their own benefit. Bruised and bound behind a camel, did he struggle to understand this turnaround in his circumstances? Just that morning, he had been the favored son of a man of resources. But now he was thrust into survival mode, surrounded by men who would meet any weakness with harsh punishment, not compassionate concern. Did he have time to process the betrayal, or did survival mode take over? Genesis 37 through 50 gives us the story of this young man, Joseph, son of Jacob, great-grandson of Abraham. Less than a chapter after we meet him, he has been betrayed by his own brothers and flung into a hostile, unknown world. He will live for decades surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. His brother's betrayal broke every relationship Joseph had up to that point in his life, leaving him powerless to do anything except try to survive. He lost the most important things human needs to flourish. He lost love. He lost belonging. He lost trusted relationships. He was alienated from all he had known, from all the relationships that were important to him. He would live. He would even flourish, but his losses would permanently alter his life and weigh heavily on him for decades. Joseph's ambiguous loss. It's helpful to have a name for our grief when we experience broken relationships as Joseph did. Therapist and researcher Pauline Boss popularized the phrase ambiguous loss. You can read more about it on her website, ambiguousloss.com. This is different from a loss such as the death of a loved one. It's less straightforward, but still agonizing. It is a type of loss without a culturally recognized way to grieve or reach closure. It can involve physical absence with psychological presence, so divorce or estrangement from family, for example. You don't see the person anymore, but they are still very present in your mind. Or it can involve psychological absence with physical presence. In this case, a loved one is missing emotionally or cognitively, though you can still see them regularly in person. Addiction, depression, dementia, and other chronic physical and mental illnesses can result in this type of loss. Such losses leave us stuck while our family, church, or work relationships go on without us. Other people seem to sail on as we are left treading water in their wake. How do we navigate and grieve these losses when society does not necessarily even recognize them as real loss? The story of Joseph is a quintessential example of ambiguous loss. Joseph was the first son of Jacob's favorite wife, though he was the 11th son born to Jacob over all. Jacob favored Joseph over his older sons, setting his family up for jealous rivalries that tore them apart. Though his brothers originally planned to kill Joseph, they instead sold him into slavery. He experienced decades of ambiguous loss as a result, alienated from the father and little brother he loved, only to come face to face unexpectedly decades later with the very brothers that had betrayed him so callously. For those of us who are living in the middle of unreconciled relationships, even the way Joseph's story is told gives us insight into our own feelings of grief and loss. Moments of grief. I imagine Joseph's mind slowing down as he attempted to process what was happening to him. He must have been in shock. His brother's actions against him were so horrible as to be unimaginable to him. Yet, as time wore on, he woke up to a horror worse than any he'd previously imagined for himself. Enslaved in a culture he did not know, at the whim of brutal men. Early on, he found some footing in Potiphar's house, just to lose it all again when Potiphar's wife falsely accused him of rape. What was it like for Joseph to lose footing and security a second time? To be thrown into a jail cell after he had been thrown into a pit? I know from my own experiences that the second round of loss or betrayal is much worse emotionally than the first. We have a phrase for it. Joseph was kicked when he was down. While in jail, Joseph experienced a third betrayal on top of the first two. He interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer, and this man promised to remember Joseph and bring his case to Pharaoh. But he forgot, leaving Joseph in what was likely the foulest place in all of Egypt for another 2 years. Joseph sat in that dungeon, first betrayed, then falsely accused, and finally forgotten.